Okay, we're continuing with the book here, Hidden History of Health, also Nutrition and Science by me, Pete Rogers. This chapter is a little technical, so if you want, you might want to skip this chapter. This is more for people who want to develop a deep scientific understanding of how the human body actually works. So this is going to be kind of an advanced chapter. Again, if you're intimidated by chemistry, biology, biochemistry, molecular biology, then you can skip this one. But I believe the way I'm going to explain it, it's pretty simple. It's going to take about 15 minutes, and it gives you a fundamental understanding of life. Doctors don't know much, okay? The average doctor compared to me is like a mental retard, okay? They really don't know much about health, nutrition, toxicology, physiology, or pathophysiology. What they learn in med school is mostly just irrelevant nonsense. I say that based on 40 years of experience in the medical world, okay? I'm going to teach you actually what's worth knowing about the origin of life and the fundamentals of cellular physiology in a way that you'll be able to understand all the other stuff that comes along. Medical students, internal medicine doctors, they never ever develop a decent understanding of physiology. They don't have any understanding of chronic Western disease. They're pathetic, okay? So I'm going to show you what you need to know. And then also it is going to be a God-based, Christian-based explanation because you need that. The greatest scientists, writers, composers, pretty much painters, the best at everything, it's almost always a devout Christian. That's the group I'm in. I want to be with Bach and Beethoven and Mozart and Isaac Newton and James Clerk Maxwell and Thomas Aquinas. Okay, I'm with them. And Aquinas baptized Aristotle. I'm with him too because they do the best work. They tell the truth. You have to have a God-based worldview or you end up being a liar and a sellout because there's too much money to be made by being a liar, a weasel, and a sellout and a scumbag. But if you want to be good and do what's right, you have to be that way. Okay, so first of all, you know, it's so obvious that all this stuff had to be created by God. If somebody just wrote your name on the beach, this comes from John Lennox quote, you would know they were literate, they were intelligent, they intentionally did it with intention to write your name. That's not going to happen by accident. In a billion years, the ocean waves never going to write your name on the beach. Okay? So how the heck did the human genome, 3.3 billion base pairs of DNA, complex chemistry, write itself? It's impossible. The information has to come from somewhere. It comes from the mind of God. People aren't smart enough to do it. Okay, so now we're going to get into more and more stuff. God is what makes the most sense, John Lennox. Okay? It makes the most sense that God is the author of the genetic code. Stephen Meyer, all the smart guys know this. Michael Behe, Douglas Adams, Rosali, Fana, Denton. They all know this, okay? James Tour, origin of life researchers in 2026 are nowhere near being able to spontaneously generate life. If you want to learn about origin of life chemistry, take a look at James Tour videos, okay? He's a PhD, biochemist, nanochemist. He goes through, what a joke their chemistry is. It's so much more complicated than anything they can do. Here's a funny quote by Brenner. This guy's another Nobel Prize winner. He said, even God wouldn't get approved for a grant today because somebody on a committee would dispute him. They would say, oh, his experiments are interesting, creating the universe, but they've never been repeated. And he did it a long time ago. What's he done recently? And a third would say, to top it all, he published it in an unrefereed journal called The Bible. Sidney Brenner, okay? He's a Nobel Prize winner guy. I don't like peer-reviewed journals that much, and I'll tell you why. Because they don't allow original new information in. They want micro questions asked or something that makes money for the journal. Most of them suck. I can tell you almost all the medical journals and nutrition journals nowadays are fake. That's a true statement. Okay, let's see, here's a quote by, where is this coming from? This is coming from Philip E. Johnson. He says, Chinese paleontologist lectures around the world tell everybody, look, the record of the rock, the fossils, does not support Darwinian theory because it comes in jumps. New phyla appear out of nowhere like the Cambrian expansion. That goes against Darwin's theory. We've had over 150 years since Darwin, and they still can't find fossils to support Darwinian theory. It doesn't work. It only works for microevolution, variation in a species. Nobody cares about microevolution. It does not work for macroevolution. It does not work for origin of life. The reason why Darwinism gets promoted in neo-Darwinism is because it supports atheism, the idea of the creation story of atheism to trick people into becoming atheism so that they can be weakened and pushed into slavery. And I realize most of you don't know, and it's not my fault you went to public school and you're an ignoramus. I'm just telling you the truth. If you read additional stuff on this, you will see that I am correct. Okay, I've studied evolutionary biology for over 40 years. Okay, here is God creating the world here. This is the painting by William Blake. He measured everything out. It's a logical, rational universe. He started out by making life in the sea. You need to know that. It came out of seawater. Seawater contains sodium chloride. So seawater is the extracellular space, high in sodium and chloride. The water would rinse along the rocks. And because it rinses along the rocks, like over here, it's going to rinse, the rocks are calcium carbonate. It's going to rinse, limestone. It's going to rinse the calcium into the water. You have to know that. Seawater is high in calcium, high in sodium chloride, and that is your extracellular space. You need to know that for cell physiology. That's a basic concept. Stephen Meyer, this is a good book, and he's got a bunch of YouTube videos. Stephen Meyer, PhD, real smart guy. So if you want to read more, he's a good guy to start with, all right? And then blue light, right from the beginning, was daytime, because blue light's the only one that uniquely penetrates deep down into the ocean water, into the salt water. So all the ocean life sees blue light as meaning daytime, and the absence of blue light meaning daytime. And all life on Earth is programmed to go by that. And that's relevant for circadian rhythms, okay? We've talked about how the red light has longer wavelengths, and it actually is better at penetrating the human body, okay, and goes right through clothing, goes through clouds, and that energizes mitochondrial function. What I'm trying to say is there's a beautiful design by all this, and when you understand it, it makes it a lot easier to tell a person how to be healthy. And basically what you tell a person to be healthy is be like Adam and Eve, but keep your indoor heating and plumbing. Be active in the daytime in the sunlight. At night, go to sleep, all right? Walk around in nature, seeing all the green light, which reflects red and infrared back on you to energize your mitochondria. Okay, so now if you enclose a cell with a phospholipid bilayer, can you close that window, please, darling? Okay, you then have to pump the salt water out of it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to pump anything in, because you have to maintain osmolality neutrality, okay? You have to have the same number of particles inside as outside it. Otherwise, the water would flow in and make it burst. So God pumped out all of the seawater stuff, sodium chloride and the calcium, and he put replacement ions instead. He replaced the sodium, Na plus, with K plus for potassium. He replaced the calcium with magnesium, Mg2 plus for Ca2 plus, all right? Life on Earth has high intracellular potassium and magnesium. If you look at a blood test, you'll see high sodium in the blood, okay? Relatively high calcium in the blood, relatively high chloride in the blood, much lower inside a cell. So life on Earth is dependent on that. And that's also why we have to eat whole plant foods, because that's how we get the potassium and the magnesium from them. If you only eat processed food, they smush it out and they rinse it with water and solvents, and they rinse away the potassium and the magnesium, then they add back sodium chloride to make it taste good. And because it's antibacterial, antifungal, it creates a hyperosmolality around it so stuff can't grow. So you have to eat whole foods if you want to maintain a good blood pressure throughout your life. It's just a fact. We're made for that. No medical, surgical bullshitology can change that, okay? And you're going to have like these ionic constants to maintain gradients across a cell of ions, okay, and to maintain membrane voltages inside the cell. The amount of sodium and potassium is going to be constant. If you eat these modern processed food diets with tons of sodium, you're going to start replacing the intracellular potassium with sodium, and you're going to mess up your cell gradients, you're going to cause hypertension, you're going to cause cellular dysfunction. And that's what happens to most people. Okay, here's just showing you a table of the different amounts. Sodium is about, 10 to 1, 14 to 1 higher in the extracellular space. Potassium is much higher in the intracellular space. Calcium is like 10,000 times higher extracellular. Okay. And then the way the cell generates an electrical battery across its plasma membrane is through these sodium-potassium ATP pumps. So it pumps out 3 sodiums while bringing in 2 potassiums. So more charge is going out, 3 positives, while 2 positives come in. So this leads to a net negative charge on the inside of the cell along the plasma membrane. That charge gradient can be harvested to pump other things. You also have a concentration gradient. The concentration of sodium is high outside the cell. It's low inside the cell. So it wants to come into the cell towards the negative charge. It also wants to come into the cell to equilibrate its ionic gradient. That's very important because that gradient of sodium is going to be used to pump other things. It can be coupled to pumping calcium out of the cell. You'll bring in 3 sodiums while pumping out calciums. That's called the NACA exchanger, Na for sodium, Ka for calcium. And it can pump like 1,000 in a minute. It's super fast. And that's basically how a cell does work. It has an electrical battery in its plasma membrane. Okay? And it needs ATP. Well, the ATP is made in the mitochondria. The mitochondria is like a nuclear power plant to split the atom and generate ATP energy, and then the ATP is used to run the battery on the plasma membrane. That is how life on Earth exists. And it all begins with God creating life in the ocean, with the extracellular space being the same thing as seawater, essentially the same thing as seawater. To activate a cell, you have an influx of calcium, and then whatever that cell does, its main job will be activated when the calcium comes into the cell. And it's even more beautiful than that. There's 4 phases of water. There's liquid water, there's gas vapor water, there's solid water and ice, but there's also gel water. You know that because if you get a cut and you bleed blood, you don't bleed water. If you crack an egg, you grab an egg out from underneath the chicken and you crack it, you'll see a gel, you won't see water. And most of the water in the body is in the gel form, including most of your intracellular water. And when calcium comes and interacts with it, it'll fluidize it to liquefy it. It'll also liquefy it when it moves into the mitochondrial matrix. And red light, infrared light will liquefy the water around ATP synthase in the mitochondria. And that's why you can have all these microdomains of calcium inside a cell to fluidize the water locally to activate those parts of the cell. So isn't that beautiful? A cell can compartmentalize itself based on localized puffs of calcium. So it's a beautiful control system. And then to make everything easier, I gave the ions personalities. I used metaphors to anthropomorphize them. It'll make sense in a moment. So I said that calcium here is like my ex-wife, the big bossy matriarch. She walks in and she starts bitching, telling everybody what to do. Let's say she comes home from work. She walks in the kitchen and she says, "What the F is this? How come this plate's all over the place? This place is a mess. Where's that kid? Get over here. You're supposed to put dishes away." Then she says, "How come there's dog crap all over the living room? Where's that kid? You're supposed to clean up this." And she starts yelling at that. And she says, "Why is the effing garage such a mess? Where's my lazy ass husband? He was supposed to clean that up. Hey, get over here." Okay, so calcium comes in. It's a big matriarch. BITCH, not reasonable, just starts bossing everybody around. Calcium makes the cell do whatever the cell has to do at that moment. Okay, remember that. Calcium makes it do whatever it has to do. It's the matriarch. She's not reasonable. Okay. Yeah, I said there's a big difference between, I'm not even going to get into that other stuff. Okay, now here is men working, and I say that potassium is like dear old dad. He's just hard-working guy, tries to make things work for the family, okay? He keeps the trains running on time. It's kind of a thankless task. He commutes to his boring job all day, and then the family takes all his money, and he don't even need the money, they do, okay? And then magnesium is like the hero. So potassium is just running your ion pumps and making sure everything is as it should be. Potassium is more like the hero. Potassium is more like your heroic uncle. Uncle comes in and he tells you all these great adventure stories he's had, all about his travels around the world. Dear old dad never goes anywhere. He's boring. All the kids want to listen to uncle stories. He's more interesting than dear old dad. And the uncle, like Ben-Hur, he's powerful. He holds the 2 ATP together, the 2 phosphates, so they don't burst apart. The phosphates, the second and third phosphate on ATP. He also guards the calcium channel of the neurons, the NMDA channel, so that calcium can't come in. He blocks the calcium. So magnesium is the heroic ion, and it just mellows everything out simultaneously too in a good way. Okay, M for magnesium, M for mellow. It does both. So here's a picture of what magnesium does. Using its 2 positive charges, it prevents the second and third phosphate from pulling apart on ATP until it's ready in the reaction for that to happen. So you need magnesium to make your ATP reactions run correctly. Okay, here's just showing it in a little bit more complex form. Magnesium also guards the NMDA receptor, the calcium channel. Okay, and then once you have initial depolarization of the membrane and the charge starts becoming less negative, then the magnesium will jump away because there's no longer a strong negative charge to attract it, and now calcium can enter through the cell. That's what I meant by it guards the NMDA channel, blocking the center of it. Okay, and this is neurotransmission. And once glutamate activates the cell, you get the influx of calcium, and then the postsynaptic neuron will be activated. Okay, and this is how cell physiology is regulated all over the body. All right, now I'm going to show you. Here's another thing about magnesium. It's right in the center of chlorophyll. So that's how you get magnesium. You eat plants. It's right in the center of chlorophyll. You eat your plants, you get your magnesium. You don't get as much from animal foods. Now here is crazy sodium. Crazy sodium is like the angry poor, and it's being kept out of all the good stuff, and it wants to bust into the city where the rich people live. So sodium is angry and wants to bust into the cell. And the city lets a little bit of sodium come in because it needs it to do manual labor work, all right? The most important thing for your cell physiology to run well with regard to preventing hypertension is your K factor, your ratio in your diet of potassium to sodium. It has to be over 5. It should better be at least 10. Our ancestors were probably around 20, okay? Well, at least 10. All right, here's just some example. You know, fruits tend to be like anywhere from about 60 to 450 times more potassium than sodium. Starches are more in the ballpark of about 15 to 60 times more potassium than sodium in their K factor. Veggies are much lower, you know, 5 to 15. Okay, and then meat's around 5. All the processed foods lower. Often it's like, you know, below 1. It's a joke. Okay, processed food causes hypertension. That's your K factor. And that doesn't just mess up your blood pressure, it messes up all your cellular physiology. And it's much better to just eat what you're designed to eat, the plant foods, than to try taking pills and supplements. Okay, now I'm going to show you one other thing that's a little bit interesting. This is the secret of microdomains for calcium control of physiology in a cell. And what I liken it to is, here's mama, okay, always picking on the old man. But then here is mama's mother-in-law. Here's mama's sisters, 1, 2, and 3. And these are all the separate microdomains of calcium in the cell. So what mama does, calcium, the big boss matriarch, it picks up the phone and says, "Mama, come over." Mother-in-law comes over, calls up all the sisters, all the aunts, and then they all gang up on the good old man, the potassium, and they force different things to happen around the cell. So they can have activation through the microdomains, focal releases of calcium, activate other things in a cell. This especially is relevant in cardiac physiology, but it's also highly relevant in neurophysiology for activating different parts of the cell selectively. And so that's the way you can remember it. It's the estrogenic female control led by Big Boss Mama with her sisters, the aunts, and her mother-in-law. And they're controlling the cell, making poor potassium work his ass off. That's how cellular physiology works. If you remember that, it'll be a walk in the park for you to learn cardiovascular physiology, a walk in the park to learn neurophysiology, okay? And here's just like a little example of what I was talking, the cardiac muscle cell. You'll get secondary release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Think of that as being the aunts and being the mother-in-law, and that facilitates the localized activation of the adjacent muscle, okay? And there's similar related things inside a neuron in the brain. Okay, here's the guy who wrote the book on the fourth phase of water, the scientist Gerald Pollack. Okay, really important concept, and it relates to a lot of other physiology we're not going to go into. Oh, and I just in this chapter also included some of the reasons why I believe in God. I believe in God based on the Bible, the Ten Commandments, the case for Christ. I studied all that stuff backwards and forwards. You'd be amazed how good the evidence is for the life of Christ and what he did. But there's tons more than that. The origin of the universe arguments, the fine-tuning arguments, the biochemistry fine-tuning arguments, the astronomy fine-tuning arguments, the orphan genes not being present in other species arguments, the record of the rock arguments, okay? I studied all this stuff in great detail, and it's real good. Anybody who like really understands it and they're honest. The people who deny it are the ones who want to bring about atheism, return of slavery, okay? There's a lot of people that think if they do the bidding of the billionaire perverts that run the world, that the billionaire perverts will favor them in the future slave labor economy. I'm not so sure. You know what they say, if you try to ride a tiger, you often fall off his back and get eaten. Okay, you know, as long as I have my time on this planet, I'll be grateful for Christianity and Christ and the message he gave for everybody to get along with each other. Okay, here's a good quote from Ann Coulter from the book Godless. She says, "Far from showing gradual change, with one species slowly giving way to transitional forms and another, as Darwin hypothesized, the fossil record showed vast numbers of new species suddenly appearing out of nowhere, remaining largely unchanged for millions of years and then disappearing. Almost like there was a big flood or something." Yeah, no shit. There's evidence of a flood not only in Genesis in the Bible, but in all the other cultures like Mesopotamia, the ancient Greeks. Look at the ancient Greeks in the story of Deucalion, for example. Okay, what does Mesopotamia mean? Between two rivers that flooded. Okay. Neo-Darwinism theory of generating variety by mutations, a joke. A mutation's like scratching an audio CD with a paper clip. You're not going to improve Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Brahms, Handel, Liszt, and all the other great ones by scratching their CDs with a paper clip. It's nonsense. Nobody's ever witnessed evolution, Darwinian evolution, in a test tube. Nobody can explain the irreducible complexity of the human eye, of the immune system, of the clotting system, of protein synthesis, of the flagella, and tons of other stuff. All that stuff about us being like chimps was a bunch of lies. We're not like chimps. So, and then also I look around the world and what do I see? Almost everything good came from Christianity. The ancient Greeks and then Christianity. There's some exceptions, not too many though. They developed the universities, the charities, the best architecture, Gothic cathedrals, the best painting, the best sculpture, the best science, the best music, the best literature, the homeless shelters. It goes on and on. Study science, study the history of science. You'll be amazed. Almost everything came from Christianity. There's a reason for it, because they said that man is created in the image of God, therefore he too can be a creator. He is like God. The universe is rational. It was measured out in rational form with a rational God, and we are rational creatures. Therefore we can understand it, and we do honor to God by studying it. That led to the modern scientific method. In other cultures, like, you know, Maya in Hinduism, is like they said, no one can understand. Life has no meaning. Buddha, you know, life has no meaning. There's nothing you could do. Stare at the wall and say Om. That does not lead to scientific discovery, okay? Later on, other cultures copied what they learned from the West, but it came from the West, the concept of modern science and everything. Okay, so that's it for today. I hope you found that helpful.